First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for this kind invitation. I am delighted to be part of the BCG conference and also to share some insights into this very important conversation. I think that the world is experiencing right now increasingly severe impacts from climate change, and unfortunately, that's a trend that we will keep witnessing more and more over time, and that's why these kind of discussions are so relevant for the future of humanity, and I am really delighted to be part of them. Today, I would like to share with you some of the work that I did as mayor of Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, regarding climate action. First of all, I have to say that I am a strong believer on the power of cities. I think cities should become the main drivers in the battle against climate change. Actually, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stated that it is in cities where the battle against climate change will be defined. And why that is the case? It is the case because it is in cities where more than 70% of CO2 emissions are taking place. That means that without an effective role from cities, it will be impossible for countries to meet their nationally determined contributions. It will be impossible for countries to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So in that regard, cities are playing a fundamental role in tackling climate change. And fortunately, mayors have the capacity, the ability to do so in many ways. Cities are ideal innovation labs to test new things, new solutions to tackle climate change. And that is what we try to do here in the city of Quito. What did we do? The first thing I did as mayor, since I had climate very top in my agenda, the first thing we did is to measure where our emissions were coming from, which was the main source of our CO2 emissions. And it turned out that the main source was our mobility system. More than 56% of CO2 emissions in the city of Quito were coming out from our mobility system. So clearly, it was there where we had to focus our efforts on. And we did. We undertook the largest infrastructure project in the history of the city. We built the first metro line here in Quito, which also is the first metro line in all of Ecuador. It was a major endeavor, not an easy one, technologically complex process. Quito is in the middle of the mountains with a very rough topography, and we decided to build the metro all underground. So you can imagine all of the technical and logistical challenges that implied. But it was actually a very successful project. We managed to build it in only 3 years, a 22-kilometer line metro with 15 stations. Built in 3 years is actually really very, very quickly for this kind of large infrastructure endeavors. And it is a project that it is now mobilizing around 400,000 people per day. And when it comes to climate, it helps to capture more than 150 tons of CO2 per year that otherwise will be generated into the atmosphere. So this is the mitigation impact that the metro project is having. Very important. Now, this was, of course, our major initiative, but not the only one. We also developed different projects regarding adaptation and mitigation. For instance, we expanded our network of BRT lines. We all know that BRTs are efficient ways to mobilize people, and we already had in Quito 5 lines. So what we did is we expanded them to complement the metro, to feed the metro with more demand. Also, we undertook a very ambitious project to pedestrianize the main streets of our historical district. Quito has a very beautiful historical district. Actually, because of that, Quito became the first city in the world to become a World UNESCO Heritage Site. So for us, it's a very precious area. And of course, it was being very much contaminated because of all the vehicles running around the historical district. So we decided to pedestrianize most of it. And it was, of course, a challenging initiative because at the beginning there was some reluctance, some resistance from people, from shop owners that thought that maybe that won't be good for their businesses. So it was socially complex, but at the end, it worked out very well. Actually, and this is something that happens all over the world, when you pedestrianize streets, you actually foster commercial and economic activity, you foster tourism, and of course, you help reduce pollution in that area, which is good for the climate. So now we have a very beautiful historical district in which you can walk around without vehicles, bothering you on your side. Also, Quito is surrounded by very ecologically fragile ecosystems. And unfortunately, every summer, we are subject to forest fires, which have devastated large areas of forests. So we decided to undertake a very ambitious reforestation initiative. And in 4 years in office, we planted more than 1.2 million trees in areas that were previously devastated by forest fires. Also, we expanded the surface of natural protected areas around the city. More than 150,000 hectares around the main urban area in Quito are now natural protected areas to conserve our very fragile but very rich ecosystems. So all of this, was part of a comprehensive climate action plan that we developed at the very beginning of our administration. Now, let me tell you what are the challenges that we faced in implementing this action. And these are challenges that now are faced by all cities in the world, basically, because I have the privilege to work with many mayors around the world. I work closely with different city networks. I actually teach a course at the University of Pennsylvania on cities' climate finance. Why? Because for me, that's the main challenge, finance. What's the problem here? Cities are confronting a global financial architecture that was designed for countries, for national governments. The institutions we have today, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the multilateral development banks in different regions of the world, so on and so forth, all of those institutions were created in Bretton Woods in the 1940s, when the world was not nearly as urbanized as it is today. But hey, things have changed. We live in a different reality today, a reality in which more than half of the population live in cities. And it is in cities where we are dealing with some of the world's most pressing issues. So now we are confronting the fact that this financial system is completely geared towards channeling resources into national governments, no, not into subnational governments. And cities are having a very hard time in accessing finance. So for us, that was the main challenge, and it remains the main challenge for cities in their ambition to undertake climate action. So let me tell you a little bit of why this system has not been designed for cities. In only 44% of countries of the world, cities are not allowed to international borrowing. That means that in the other, in only 44% of the world, cities are allowed to borrow. That means that in the other 56% of countries, in the majority of countries of the world, cities are not allowed to borrow. Now, in the 44% of countries where they are allowed to borrow, they still must confront different kinds of challenges, requirements. For example, in many of these countries, the only way for cities to get access to international finance, for example, in the case of the city of Quito in Ecuador, is by getting a national government's sovereign guarantee. A national government's sovereign guarantee that, as you might imagine, is very frequently not granted because of political rivalries between the national and the local government, something that unfortunately I have to personally suffer from. So that's a challenge, because that means that because of politics, cities are not getting those sovereign guarantees that would allow them to access financial resources to develop critically important climate resilient infrastructure projects. That's the reality many, many cities around the world are facing. That's really concerning, because that means that if cities should become the major drivers in the battle against climate change, if it is in cities where the battle against climate change will be defined, like the UN Secretary General mentioned, unfortunately, cities cannot do their job in this very important task. Why? Because they are not accessing enough funding. Why? Because the international financial system has been designed for countries, not for cities, and it hasn't changed yet. It is clearly not fit for purpose anymore in the highly urbanized world we live in. So that's why, myself, along with a group of mayors, former mayors, academics, leaders from different international financial institutions, just set up a commission. It is called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Global Commission for Urban SDG Finance. The idea of this commission is to promote reforms to the international financial system to make it more cities friendly, to develop new direct financial facilities for cities. For example, we are right now working in the creation of what we call the Green Cities Guarantees Fund. This Green Cities Guarantees Fund will become an alternative guarantees mechanism for cities, an alternative to the one of national sovereign guarantees, which, as we mentioned before, it is highly politicized. So the fact of having a city dedicated, internationally run city guarantees fund would help cities to access financing in better terms, in better conditions. It will allow them to access timely and affordable borrowing to develop climate resilient infrastructure projects. This is just one of the many, many initiatives that are needed to facilitate cities' access to finance. Again, and to summarize, because I think my time is running up now, and I would love to hear questions from the audience, I have to say that, number one, cities are key in the battle against climate change. You can see many mayors around the world doing fantastic work on climate, undertaking much more ambitious agendas than national governments in many cases. Cities are ideal places for innovation, to encourage community action, to foster multi-stakeholder partnerships, to implement climate action. But they confront a financial system that is not friendly for cities, that we must reform, we must change. And the fact of having spaces like this to share these ideas and to foster discussions around these very important topics is truly fundamental, and for which I am very grateful for you.